Welcome to People Keeping It Sacred, our new program highlighting people keeping it sacred in the world. I'm Rabbi Heather Miller, founder of Keeping It Sacred, and I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest, Jethro Heiko. Jethro has over 25 years of experience applying his skills in community organizing, strategic nonviolence, and bereavement to authentically and deeply engage individuals, organizations, and communities. Following the death of his father 25 years ago, Jethro founded a bereavement support organization that helped college students cope with serious illness or the death of a loved one. Jethro learned how meaningful and surprisingly joyful these conversations about what matters most can be, and was struck that people do not have to wait until there is a health crisis to have and benefit from these conversations. He's the co-founder of Common Practice, which we'll hear a bit more about. And he's my friend. Jethro grew up in Boston. He lives in Philadelphia with his wife, Chelsea, and his children, Hazel and Orson. And as I mentioned, we became great friends serving on the board of a nonprofit organization called Resource Generation 20 years ago. And I can't believe it's been 20 years now. Jethro, I can't wait to hear more of how you're keeping it sacred now. Welcome, Jethro.
Thanks for, hey, I'm excited.
Me too. What I love so much about, the fact that your dad was able to sit you and your family down and have some of those really important conversations is that then you did take those conversations and you made it into a game. Can you tell us you were talking a little bit about being irreverent and taking such a tender moment, but how did you come up with this idea as a game, and how are you keeping that game sacred? How are you keeping it sacred?
I mean, and the game, it's now called Hello. Changed the name a few years ago. It's been almost 7 years since we designed it. It's a very simple conversation game that helps people, start conversations about living and loss, caregiving, and it's 32 kind of provocative, open-ended questions meant to be played with 3 to 5-ish people around like a kitchen table. I've been working with healthcare systems and community organizations and faith-based, groups, churches and synagogues, etc. And it doesn't, I don't have any, when I'm working with a group, or family, it's funny because I've played the game, of course, hundreds of times. So, and at times there's like some consternation and anxiety. I just have a lot of confidence. The game, it just works. And some people think it's the questions. It's not the questions. People are like, well, what's the secret? I'm like, because people are good. And they're like, people are good? I'm like, yeah, people are good. They just need permission. They need some structure. Like the tyranny of structurelessness can rear its ugly head at any point. And you need to create safety in the technical term, like psychological safety. People need to feel as though if they say something, vulnerable, perhaps risky, that they won't be judged for it. And the rules sort of make that, possible. It's, I've only seen one person incapable of playing the game, and dare I say they were like a sociopath. There was no possibility for them to engage in anything socially. But other than that, everyone can play. People can resist it. Men will resist it usually more, in my experience, than people that don't identify as men. But it's fun to play. We have there's a recent study that it shows that, it was interesting because for some time, I would hear white healthcare professionals sort of say things like, African Americans in my community don't want to talk about these issues, about advanced care planning, end of life issues, death, etc. And I would often say something like, well, they probably don't want to talk about it with you. But let's not go so far as to say they don't want to talk about it, because, people, in my experience, people from all sorts of backgrounds, again, if they feel safe and there's some structure, then we'll talk about it. So anyway, there's a study that showed that it was based on a national project by the Hospice Foundation of America, and 50 communities brought primarily African Americans together to play the game, and it had very similar results of other diverse people or homogeneous people playing the game of all sorts of backgrounds. So I think the research is sort of challenging some of the assumptions about communities and their interest in talking about these issues. Yeah, so that's hello. And then right now we're play testing like an abbreviated version called Hi.
Hi.
Which and we're really testing the instructions for video play, because we know that a lot of people are going to be, people aren't going to be getting together in large groups of people, because we'd have game events of like 200, 300 people where people at tables of 5 or 6 people will play the game. And there's passing chips, and there's, you're in an intimate conversation, usually a small round table or whatever. So, and they shouldn't do it right now. So we're going to release a free version, this abbreviated version, hopefully, soon. So yeah, people can play Hi with anyone around the world, and I'm excited for it, because I do think once people start playing it, then in some ways, like the larger game we're playing is like, if everyone is having these conversations outside of the game context, then it's going to make healthcare workers' jobs easier. It's going to make if you're a healthcare proxy to a loved one, what's that?
Clergy's lives easier.
Yeah, chaplains and clergy, and hopefully just get away from the idea that it's scary.
Yep.
That it's only scary, right? So sometimes I think it's like, well, it's scary, so I don't do it, versus,
right,
here's how I make it less scary, or here's how, even if it is scary, I still do it, because it's sort of similar to the grieving issue that we talked about earlier. The positive things that can come from people engaging in these conversations is like more than makes up for, whatever fear you might have going into it, and then you begin to question other fears, like, well, maybe I should talk about other issues, right? So, issues that are often avoided, talking about racism and race between people that are different is avoided, or talking about trauma, or talking about violence, or, there's so many things that we avoid talking about our own identities, talking about religion, or not being religious. Those things are all things that can keep people from engaging in really meaningful conversations, which lead to community. And that's one thing I'm excited about with the game. I've seen it both like within a community, of similar, faith tradition, or similar community, or similar politics, but then I've also seen it like across differences, and I'm sure we can find plenty of people that would disagree with me politically who also lost their father. And if I'm in a conversation with them about losing a father at a young age, before I know it, it's not like I'm going to convince them about my politics, but we'll probably be able to see issues a little bit differently once we're beyond this kind of superficial and also real political difference, so how to navigate those differences is important,
Absolutely. And I love that it's a game that you're able to, play. Even, I've actually had some great experiences with people who have been diagnosed terminal, and even mentioning the game and even telling them about the game. And they're like, it's a game, what do you mean? And I say, like, yeah, well, like, for example, one of the questions is what song would you like to have played at your funeral? And, and then I shared mine and then they shared theirs, and it was like Bruno Mars Gucci dress on the floor or something. I was like, what? It's amazing, because it was like a nanogenarian woman. It was amazing. Nice. And like, it was nice to know as her rabbi, to know how to honor her wishes and to honor her life, and also to be able to ask her, like, what does that stand for you? Like, how does that relate to who you are, and how, what your legacy is, to really get into that. Because, like clergy, like our role is to translate a person's life into a living legacy, and into the values, distill a life into a
Wow.
few values that,
Sure.
that people's lives served as an example for. Right? So one thing that I really love about you and you know, your website, you're behind the dissent pins as well, which I think is really important. And so everyone, dissent pins are the RBG, started with RBG,
Yeah.
right? Collar, necklaces and earrings
Yeah.
of that.
Right.
But then now it's really expanded to, I love the little pin, like, thank you for wearing your mask. You're like, nice mask, like a little pin. 60 seconds saves lives. I love it. I love all of the pins that you're doing. But what I also really love is how intentional you're being about aligning the profit margins of dissent pins with the values of social justice and equality. And you have a whole page dedicated toward organizations that you support. And even before you buy, it says like, before you buy, like make sure like you take a moment to consider sending a donation to these organizations, just a straight donation, just
That's right.
direct donation as well. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came about and how you think about,
Sure.
you know, what you're doing in those moments, you know, what you're trying to teach your kids from you doing?
So I work with Nick Jalen. I've been working with Nick for, I say 22 years, but I think it's more. Nick is our lead designer. Just like, he's got like heart of gold with like the engineering mindset of like a, you know, rocket scientist. So he's a great partner to be doing work with. He was a lead designer of the game Hello, which I designed with Nick and two other people, Georgia Guthrie and Rob Pegler. Anyway, and then Dissent Pins, you know, it's been around over 3 years. Right after the election of 16, Justice Ginsburg, RBG, wore a collar that she calls the dissent collar. Normally she would wear it when she dissents in an opinion of the Supreme Court, but she wore it the day after the election. And it was like noticed that she wore it. So Nick very quickly, as a gift, as a holiday gift, learned everything he could about the dissent collar and came up with an illustrator, created the first dissent collar enamel pin, you know, really small, figured out how to manufacture it, made only I think 100 of them, and like gave them out as gifts for the holidays. Oh. And when I got mine, and I think I wasn't the only one, I was like, these are amazing. Like, we started just looking at like, well, what would it mean to like sell it? So like then dissentpins.com was born, and we just like had to learn everything about it. But then we also didn't feel like we should, you know, it felt not quite right to just be a for-profit business. So we had this like, well, what if we donated 50% of the profits to organizations? Well, which organizations? And most of the organizations really are, it's sort of a one-way relationship in which we ask them if we can use their name, and then we donate half the profits to them. And we don't ask for anything else. Like, it's just sort of like, so we had that sort of built, we had this profit part of it built in. Like one of our groups just won, you know, they ended like cash bail in the Bronx through this, a number, like a coalition effort, but included a group called the Bronx Freedom Fund. And they won. And, you know, like we've donated like, I don't know, $88,000 to them in the last 3 years from selling these products. And they're, you know, and now they're helping us find a, you know, person of color led bail fund. We've donated over $350,000 in 3+ years.
Wow.
So, you know, like that's the kind of money.
In the nonprofit world, that is,
it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah. But, you know, and then we'll donate products to groups. You know, and then we have a bunch of stuff. You know, we try to like be relevant to like sort of things that are emerging or coming up. So I'm actually really excited about, I think, you know, it's one of those few like interactive yard signs. So it's a yard sign that says "I vote by mail," but it comes with 2 large D's. So once you vote, you put the D on it, so it says "I voted by mail." Nice. So it's like our like low tech, high tech solutions. Well, I think you asked about like connecting that to the kids. Like I think what you know, the kids are like, well, one, they're part of the research and development part of designing new products. So right now we're playing with like, what could kids do to understand the issue of like Civil War monuments, like Confederate, really like on the Confederate side,
Yeah.
What could kids do to understand the Confederacy more than, these traitors, and why we shouldn't be celebrating, slave owners and others. So, so the kids were like, I'm always engaging them in conversations about the company and, and topics and trying, and sometimes they're really interested and sometimes they're bored. Mostly interested though, I think. So my hope for the kids going into the pandemic, I wrote this down like in late February, early March, was that they learn that magic is possible. So that's I can't say I always am very good at it. I can't say I'm always listening to them well enough, or I can't say I'm always patient. None of those things are, I could always do better. But I do pretty well. And I do think that they, I think that they're experiencing, really meaningful things.
And you're encouraging them to dream and that magic is possible. And it sounds very much like Im Tirtzu in Lo Agada, like if you will it, it is not a dream. The idea is, that it's so interesting because the leader of Black Power, BLK PWR, it's an organization. He's actually an actor here in Hollywood. And I heard him speak to LA City Council and say, this is the city of dreamers. We're so good with our imagination. Do you think we could imagine public safety without cops? Like, do you think like we have the best skills and tools for imagining? Let's reimagine what public safety is.
And I love that. I mean, that connects to this recent, I was listening to an interview with Jason Reynolds, who teamed up with, recently with Ibram X. Kennedy and wrote Stamped, and a young adult author. And what he said it stuck with me was, we're too much of our experience every day is like the culmination of the imagination of this white supremacist colonizing force from 500 years ago. Like we're living in their imagination. And it doesn't mean that we also don't have this countervailing force, but imagine if, like right now, we start the next 500 years with a new imagination. Based entirely in a new way of thinking, like to the point of this person you're mentioning, this actor that was speaking. It's like, it's like can we dare a dream? Can we imagine, because to me, that's the sort of scale that we need to be operating in.
Exactly.
This isn't the next 3 months until the election. This is the next 4 years with whoever the next president is. This is like 500 years. Like this is the time to make the split, And I think this is where grieving, I think, is sort of actually really important. We grieve things that we are attached to. Some people say we grieve things, that grieving is a response to things the loss of things that we're attached to. Some people would also say that we grieve the experience of loss of things that we love. I don't actually think you have to love it.
Right.
Because I think plenty of people grieve, have a grief response to things that actually aren't necessarily in their totality particularly positive in their lives,
Right.
But there's like a level of attachment to it. So,
right.
I think that, what's that?
It's the fear of change.
Right. Like America is attached to a number of things, like America as an entity and then people within it. And so we need to not necessarily to skip over the grieving. And I think that's where reparations as a financial discussion is really important. It's also an important discussion to see it also as like a truth and reconciliation. It's reparations, it's to repair. It's and part of that is grieving. Because grieving is about the process of making whole when there is this loss, right? And part of that making whole is making meaning. So, I do think that it's possible for us to have a new imagination that is different and lays out a different, next 500 years. And we also have to, not have to, I think it's useful to like appreciate that at a macro level, there's a grieving process to like let go of what we've had. Like, and so those people that are still fighting to maintain, kind of the worship of holding up, these monuments to Confederate soldiers and slave owners, etc., like they're holding on to that.
Right.
Rather than like, potentially grieving, that loss, which, was a significant loss that this country actually never really grieved, and not to be like overly kind. I think some people hear grief and they hear like, it's emotional. Like, no, like grief is like, dare I say it's biblical, it's at a very, it's a very potent human force. I think I think it's actually the most powerful one. And when avoided, it unleashes tremendous harm, because harm that's not transformed is transmitted. So there was some Christian scholar that said that, and I don't know his name. Just taking that language, I just love it.
Harm that's not transformed is transmitted.
Yeah, which I think is similar to like hurt people.
Yeah.
Thing, and that's that's sort of how I see much of the world, is like, oh, look at, like, it gets back to what you said when you were talking with the person and saying like, no, like that yelling is grieving, it's like,
right.
Like, so if you don't see it, then you don't appreciate it for what it is. And if you don't appreciate it again, you miss out on what can come from it.
Well, tell us, where can we find you and what projects do you want our audience to know about? All
right. So like the two main like businesses projects are descentpins.com. And you'll see like all the RBG related products, but we have a whole like pride collection, and the newest stuff in that right now is like the pronoun pins and jewelry.
Yeah.
Then we also have the essential workers and sort of science related, including like COVID, like public health related messaging, and then the vote by mail related stuff. And then there's the Hello game. That's all on the commonpractice.com website. And I think that like the newest project there, is this abbreviated version called Hi. I think
or as I call it, Chai, which means life.
That's right. And you'll be able to play for the High holidays.
That's amazing. And we will. Anyone who likes keeping it safe.
I love it. So I think, and that'll be available. We're going to be releasing it under what's called a Creative Commons license. So it's like, it'll be free. All we'll ask is that you don't like alter it, and that you like respect our, like, that it's our copyright. That's how you can find me.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our audience for tuning in. If you have someone that you'd like to recommend that we host on the show, please contact us at rabbiheathermiller.com. There you can sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date with all that we're programming and opportunities to study together and more. Thanks everyone for keeping it sacred. Be well.